The morning air in Redfern Hollow carried the scent of pine and cold iron, the kind that bit through skin and settled in bones. 8-year-old Savannah Lane tiptoed across the frost-hardened dirt barefoot, her breath fogging in front of her as she slipped past the creaky side gate and headed for the barn. A red mark bloomed across her cheek like a crimson handprint, the aftermath of a dropped plate and a stepmother's rage. Inside the barn, all was still. The old wood creaked only when the wind sighed through it, and dust hung in the sunbeams like golden snow. Midnight stirred the moment she came near, lifting his massive black head from behind the stall gate. His coat shimmered like spilled ink, and his deep, intelligent eyes found the girl instantly. Savannah pressed her face into his neck, breathing in the scent of hay, horse sweat, and something she only ever found in this space: peace. She said, "I'm not right in the head," she whispered, fingers curling in his mane. Said, "Papa should have left me with the state." Midnight nickered softly, nudging her shoulder with his nose. His breath was warm and steady, alive. Inside the house, Lorraine Lane's voice cracked through the morning like a whip. "Savannah, where's my breakfast?" Savannah flinched. "I hate eggs," she murmured. "Hate cooking them, hate dropping them." She kissed Midnight between his eyes and turned reluctantly toward the house, her small frame rigid with dread. Midnight's ears twitched, then flattened. His nostrils flared. He watched her go, unmoving, but not unfeeling. Back in the kitchen, Lorraine was waiting with her usual smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. Her dark hair was pinned back too tight. Her lips painted the shade of dried blood. The iron skillet sizzled on the stove. Savannah hurried forward, grabbing the spatula with trembling hands. "Don't mess this up," Lorraine said, sipping her coffee like it tasted better when someone else was afraid. Savannah's fingers slipped on the handle. One egg slid too far and fell half onto the plate, half onto the counter. The silence that followed was sharp and loaded. "You clumsy little idiot," Lorraine hissed. She grabbed the wooden spoon from the counter and smacked it down hard across Savannah's knuckles. The girl didn't scream, didn't even cry. She'd learned not to. "You think I won't send you away?" Lorraine spat. "Tell the state you've been talking to shadows again? That you sleep in the barn because you're scared of mirrors?" Savannah said nothing. Lorraine slammed the skillet onto the stove and turned, stalking toward the wall where Zeke's old leather strap hung from a hook. She yanked it down. "Maybe that damn horse of yours needs some correction too, staring at me like he's judging my soul." Savannah gasped. "No, please, he didn't do anything. Shut it. You want to act like a wild animal? You can live like one. Get outside. Both of you are getting a lesson today." Savannah was shoved out the back door, bare feet slapping the frozen wood of the porch. Lorraine followed, strap in hand, her steps purposeful. But what neither of them saw was the stall gate in the barn, swinging open. Midnight stood in the center of the yard, muscles taut beneath his black coat. His head lowered, eyes locked on Lorraine. She raised the strap. The stallion moved. It happened faster than breath. Midnight's jaws clamped around the leather midair, tearing it from Lorraine's grip with a violent snap. The strap landed in the dirt, coiled like a dead snake. "What in the—" Lorraine stumbled back, stunned. Midnight stepped forward, deliberate, controlled. His ears pinned flat. His breath puffed from his nose like smoke from a furnace. Savannah stood frozen, half in awe, half in fear. She'd never seen Midnight like this. Less horse, more sentinel. "You think I'm afraid of you?" Lorraine growled. "You're just a damn animal." She grabbed a broken fence post from the pile near the barn and swung it at his head. Midnight dodged like a whisper. The wood splintered against the barn wall. A voice rang out behind them. "Lorraine Lane!" Lorraine whirled. At the edge of the property, Deputy Grace Turner sat tall on her roan mare, brown hair tucked under her wide-brim hat, hand resting near her sidearm. "What's going on here?" she asked, voice steady. "He attacked me," Lorraine cried, the victim's mask snapping into place. "Savannah's got that animal riled up. She's not right, I've said that before." But Deputy Turner's eyes swept the scene. Strap in the dirt, Savannah's bleeding knuckles, the shattered fence post. Midnight stood between them like a black wall. Before she could speak, Lorraine spun on her heel and stormed back into the house. "Savannah," Grace said quietly, "stay with the horse." Savannah nodded, fingers fisting the back of Midnight's mane. Inside the house, Lorraine tore open the locked cabinet marked Zeke's. She pulled out the old hunting rifle and checked the chamber. Loaded, one shell left. She moved to the window, lifted the barrel, and pointed it straight at Midnight's chest. Outside, Grace saw the glint of metal just as Sheriff Wes Callahan pulled up in his battered pickup. The sheriff stepped out slowly, his blue eyes catching the sun. "Lorraine," he called out, calm but firm, "you don't want to do this." She didn't respond. Midnight stood still, unafraid. The rifle trembled in Lorraine's hands. Wes's hand moved to his holster, and in that second, everything hung in the balance. A girl, a stallion, and the question of whether justice belonged to laws or to those who stood up when no one else did. The rifle cracked. It wasn't a shot. It was the stock of the old Winchester splitting in two as Sheriff Wes Callahan's bullet struck the wood just above the grip. The rifle clattered to the floor inside the house, and Lorraine Lane screamed as splinters sliced across her palms. For a moment everything was still. No birds, no breath, just the sound of the wind brushing across dry leaves. Midnight didn't move. He stood in the middle of the yard like a monument of muscle and fury, towering and silent. Savannah crouched behind him, her fingers tangled in his mane, her knees soaked with morning dew. She didn't cry, just stared at the open doorway where the threat had come from, heart hammering like a drum. Wes holstered his revolver with steady hands. "Deputy," he called out, his voice low but sharp, "secure the house." Grace Turner had already dismounted and drawn her weapon. She moved like a shadow across the porch, disappearing into the house as Lorraine's cries turned to curses. Wes knelt beside Savannah. "You hurt anywhere?" She shook her head. She was going to hurt him. She won't get that chance again. Behind the barn came the low growl of an engine. Zeke Lane's rusted pickup truck rolled into the clearing, kicking up a cloud of gravel. He slammed the brakes and jumped out, still in his mining gear, boots caked in coal dust, helmet under one arm, face smeared with grime and disbelief. "What in God's name, Savannah? Lorraine?" he stammered, eyes darting from the barn to his daughter, to the massive stallion standing like a shield in front of her. Wes stepped into his path. "Zeke, take a breath. There's a lot you don't know." Zeke's gaze moved slowly, first to Savannah's bare feet, bruised knuckles, and frightened eyes, then to the broken rifle on the porch, and finally to the leather strap in the dirt, frayed at one end, as if bitten clean in half. "What happened?" he whispered. Grace reappeared, dragging a handcuffed Lorraine down the steps. Her eyes blazed with fury, lips twisted in a sneer. "She set that beast on me," Lorraine hissed. "That little brat and her animal tried to kill me." "That's enough," Wes said. "I've told you before," Lorraine pressed on. "She's unstable, she talks to shadows, hides things, and that horse, he's dangerous." Zeke stood frozen, hands trembling. Savannah stepped forward. Midnight at her side. "She hit me, Daddy, a lot. She said Mama left because of me, said you were going to send me away." Zeke's face went pale. "What?" "She locked me in the shed when you were gone. Took my sketchbook, said Midnight was evil and needed to be put in his place." The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Wes placed a hand on Zeke's shoulder. "We're taking her in. You good with us taking Savannah, too? Just until things settle?" Zeke nodded slowly. Yeah, I didn't know." Grace helped Savannah into the back of the cruiser. Midnight followed to the door, nostrils flaring, hooves thudding against the ground. He wouldn't leave her. "I'll walk beside him," Wes said. "Let's get her somewhere safe." They drove to the home of Reverend Cole Barrett, an old preacher known for offering shelter to anyone in trouble. His hilltop farmhouse overlooked the valley, the windows warm with lamplight even in the afternoon. Savannah barely spoke as Reverend Cole welcomed her inside with a wool blanket and a cup of warm milk. Midnight refused to enter the barn, instead planting himself outside her bedroom window, ears twitching with every sound. "He's waiting," Reverend Cole murmured. "You can sleep, child. He won't let anything past." That night, Savannah curled under the quilt and opened her sketchbook with trembling hands. Her drawings had changed. Midnight no longer just stood in pastures or reared on hills. Now he had wings. Now he fought monsters with eyes like Lorraine's. Meanwhile, Wes and Grace returned to the ranch. They searched the house thoroughly. Behind the cabinet marked Zeke's, Grace pried loose a false panel. Inside was a battered folder containing Zeke's original will, torn at the signature. A replacement document had Lorraine's name in ink, crude, forged, and dated weeks after Zeke's last trip into the mines. "Control the kid, control the property," Grace said. "She wasn't just cruel, she was planning this." "She almost got away with it," Wes muttered. They also found prescription sedatives belonging to Zeke. Several were missing. Wes pocketed them with a grim frown. At the sheriff's office, Lorraine waited with a look of smug defiance. Hours later, the door opened, and in walked Clayton Pierce, her older brother. He wore a charcoal suit, gold cufflinks, and a courtroom grin sharp enough to cut glass. "Sheriff," he said smoothly, "we're posting bail." "She's a danger to a child and an animal," Grace snapped. "You want your name on that?" Clayton shrugged. "Self-defense? Emotional child, aggressive stallion. Let's not turn a family squabble into a federal case." Wes narrowed his eyes. "She doesn't go back to the ranch. She'll stay with me." Lorraine stepped out of the cell and turned to Wes. "You've made a mistake." Wes leaned close. "If you come within 100 yards of that girl or that horse again, I'll see to it you don't walk back out." Lorraine's smile didn't reach her eyes. The next morning, a phone call shattered what little peace remained. Clayton's car had been found abandoned at the South Fork trailhead. Lorraine was gone. Savannah, now staying at the Reverend's house, heard the news in whispers. She stared out the window, clutching her pencil like a weapon. Midnight stood in the pasture, ears forward, tail flicking. "She's coming back," Savannah whispered. That night, the gate to the pasture swung open on its own. Midnight was gone. Panic ripped through the house. Reverend Cole called Wes. Grace was dispatched. Savannah bolted out the door barefoot, heart thudding in her chest. She ran into the woods, breath burning in her lungs, calling his name. Then, through the trees, under a silver moon, Midnight emerged, black as smoke, soaked with sweat. He came straight to her, pressing his head into her chest. He had found her again. Somewhere, in the darkness, a woman watched, and she was far from done. The night air was sharp with frost, and Red Fern Hollow lay hushed beneath a silver sky. But Lorraine Lane wasn't asleep. She moved like a shadow along the edge of the Lane ranch, eyes locked on the old barn. In her coat pocket, a small glass bottle clinked softly against a lighter. Arsenic powder, swiped from a forgotten feed shed 2 counties over. Her plan was simple, final. She'd lost control, lost her hold on Zeke, on Savannah. And worst of all, she'd lost the fear that used to live behind that girl's eyes. Midnight had taken it. The stallion had done more than protect the child. He'd exposed her. If she couldn't silence Savannah, she'd shatter the heart that gave her strength. Meanwhile, Savannah lay restless in her bed at Reverend Cole's farmhouse, the blanket pulled tight beneath her chin. Her eyes darted beneath closed lids, and her breath hitched in the dark. In her dreams, flames danced through the barn again. Her mother screamed. Midnight cried out, and when Savannah ran toward him, he was gone, only a trail of hoof prints leading into blackness. She jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The pasture outside was silent. Too silent. She slipped out of bed, tugged on her boots, and padded past the Reverend's slumbering form in the armchair. On the porch, the cold bit at her skin. She followed the hoof prints in the dirt with nothing but a flashlight and instinct. Back at the ranch, Lorraine crept into the barn. The feed bucket still hung where it always did. Midnight's stall door stood open, but the shadows were still. She uncapped the bottle, her breath catching in her throat as she poured the white powder into the oats. The moonlight made it shimmer like frost. But she wasn't alone. A hot breath touched her neck. She turned. Midnight loomed just feet away, ears pinned, eyes glowing with eerie calm. Lorraine gasped and dropped the bottle. It shattered at her feet, the arsenic spilling across the ground. The stallion reared. His hooves came down like thunder, shattering wood, kicking dust into the rafters. Lorraine stumbled backward, hands scraping the wall, eyes wild. "You devil!" Midnight didn't move. He didn't need to. He'd already blocked her path to the feed. Lorraine looked up into those dark eyes and, for the first time, felt something other than contempt. She felt hunted. A voice rang out behind them. "Midnight!" Savannah stood in the barn doorway, flashlight trembling in her grip. She took one step forward, then another, her gaze fixed on the scene. She tried to poison him. "You little freak," Lorraine hissed. "I should have gotten rid of you when I had the chance." Sheriff Wes and Deputy Grace arrived seconds later, drawn by the commotion. One glance told the whole story. Shattered glass, tainted feed, and a black stallion standing between predator and prey. "You've got to be kidding me," Lorraine spat. "You're going to believe this child over me? She's delusional." Grace crossed the barn floor, her voice calm. "You're out past curfew, you're holding a broken bottle of rat poison, and you're banned from this property. You want to explain that?" Lorraine's eyes darted for the door. Midnight shifted slightly, just enough to make her stop cold. Wes raised his badge. "Lorraine Lane, you're under arrest for attempted animal cruelty, child endangerment, and violation of your bail." She lunged. Grace caught her arm before she got 2 feet. The cuffs clamped tight, and Lorraine screamed curses as she was dragged past Savannah. "You'll regret this. That land is mine. That horse is a menace. He should be put down." Savannah didn't flinch. Midnight stepped closer, his body brushing against hers. She reached up and stroked his face gently. "He saved me. Again." By sunrise, Lorraine was back in custody, this time with ironclad charges. Wes began logging evidence, photos of the barn, the feed, the broken bottle. Savannah watched from the bench outside the sheriff's office as the adults talked in low, urgent voices. Zeke arrived soon after, his face hollow. He knelt beside Savannah on the cold wooden steps. "I'm sorry," he said, "for not seeing what she really was, for leaving you alone." "She said you didn't want me." Zeke's voice cracked. "She lied. I let her lie, and I can't undo that. But I'll spend every day trying to fix what I broke." Savannah didn't cry. She just looked into his face and placed her small hand on his. Back at the ranch, Wes and Grace continued searching Lorraine's room. Behind a loose plank in the bedroom wall, they found a scorched, partially intact journal, Emma Lane's. Most of the pages were ruined, but one line remained, shaky and blackened. "If anything happens to me, don't let Lorraine raise Savannah. Midnight will know what to do." The date was just 10 days before the fire that took her life. Grace whispered, "Do you think Lorraine had something to do with it?" Wes didn't answer right away. He stared out the window at the pasture, where Midnight now stood calm, grazing near the fence. "I think that horse has been keeping secrets," he said, "but never for himself." That evening, Savannah returned to the barn, not to clean or to feed or to hide, but simply to be. She sat on a bale of hay, sketchbook in her lap, Midnight beside her. She drew slowly with purpose. Her mother, Midnight, a little girl smiling between them. And above them all, wings. Wings that didn't belong to angels. Wings that belonged to a horse who had never stopped watching. Redfern Hollow had never seen such a crowd. The courthouse steps were filled before dawn, ranchers in denim and dust, teachers on break, townsfolk bundled in coats and curiosity. Camera crews rolled in from Billings, Helena, and even Seattle. They came not for a criminal trial or land dispute, but for the fate of an 8-year-old girl and her black stallion. Inside, Savannah Lane sat outside the courtroom with Sheriff Wes Callahan, sketchbook in hand, boots swinging above the floor. She didn't ask questions. She just drew. Midnight waited in a covered trailer just behind the building, watched over by Deputy Grace and Dr. Marin Holloway. "You holding up?" Wes asked. Savannah nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "I'm not scared, just tired of fighting." Wes offered a tired smile. "You've done more than most grown men would." At 10 a.m., sharp, the doors opened. The courtroom was packed. Judge Rita Morrison presided. Steel-gray hair, sharper eyes. She was known across 3 counties for cutting through theatrics like a blade. On one side of the courtroom stood Clayton Pierce, representing his sister Lorraine. In a tailored charcoal suit and expensive boots, he looked more Wall Street than Montana. His voice was cool, rehearsed. "This case is not about sentiment. It is about safety. A minor in unstable emotional condition is bonded with an animal that has demonstrated aggression toward humans. We request immediate separation and psychological evaluation for the child." Wes muttered under his breath. "Aggression, huh? Saving a kid's life counts now?" Savannah's lawyer, Eleanor Park, rose. A quiet woman with a soft voice and a spine made of steel, she addressed the judge plainly. "We contend that this is not a case of instability, but of survival. Savannah Lane is a child who was abused, neglected, and left to fend for herself. The only constant protector she had was her mother's horse, Midnight, and when the law didn't arrive fast enough, that horse acted." The courtroom shifted. Some nodded, others whispered. Eleanor turned. "We call Savannah Lane to the stand." Savannah's boots echoed as she stepped forward. The seat swallowed her small frame. But when she looked at Judge Morrison, her gaze didn't waver. "Savannah," Eleanor said gently, "tell us what happened that night." "She came back," Savannah said. "Lorraine, I knew she would. She brought poison and tried to mix it into Midnight's food, But he stopped her. He stood in front of the bucket and wouldn't move. Did he harm her? Savannah shook her head. He reared up, scared her, but never touched her. He only does that when someone's trying to hurt me. Has he ever hurt anyone else? No, Savannah said. He's only ever saved me. Clayton stood. Objection. This is hearsay from a child who's been through extreme trauma. Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. You're cross-examining a child who's more composed than most adults I've seen in this courtroom. Sit down. Next, Dr. Holloway took the stand. Midnight is not a threat, she testified. He displays signs of PTSD, yes, but he's also intelligent, responsive, and uncommonly empathetic. He has never lashed out without reason. I've observed him near children, men, machinery. He is calm, unless Savannah is in danger. Clayton pressed her. But isn't it true trauma-bonded animals can behave unpredictably? They can, Marin said. So can trauma-bonded people. That doesn't make them dangerous. It makes them in need of understanding. Midnight doesn't lash out. He protects. Then came the moment that would echo beyond court transcripts and legal briefs. The bailiff opened the rear door. In walked Midnight. No halter, no rope. Gasps rippled across the courtroom as the stallion stepped onto the tile floor. His hooves tapped slowly, soft, deliberate. His black coat shimmered under the lights. He didn't spook, he didn't balk. He walked past the bench, past the audience, past Clayton Pierce, and headed straight for Savannah. She didn't move. She didn't call him. He lowered his head and gently laid it in her lap. The courtroom held its breath. One reporter's camera shutter echoed like a gunshot. Clayton stood. This is spectacle. Savannah looked up. No, sir, this is proof. Judge Morrison finally spoke. Let the record show that the animal in question just approached the child unprompted, without disturbance, and is currently exhibiting no signs of distress or aggression. A pause. Court is adjourned for deliberation. It didn't take long. 30 minutes later, Judge Morrison returned and delivered her ruling. The court recognizes that Savannah Lane has been placed in danger not by her relationship with this animal, but by the adults who were supposed to protect her. Guardianship is awarded to her biological father, Zeke Lane. She turned toward Savannah. And as for Midnight, he shall remain in Savannah's care. Furthermore, this court grants him status as a certified therapeutic and protected animal under Montana state law. A stunned silence, then applause, unofficial, but nobody stopped it. Outside, as Savannah and Midnight stepped onto the courthouse steps, the crowd erupted. Children waved drawings of horses. Reporters shouted questions. Someone handed Savannah a bouquet of sunflowers. She said nothing. She simply knelt beside Midnight and whispered into his ear, "We're free." That evening, back at the Lane Ranch, trucks rolled in. Locals brought hammers, nails, boards, buckets of paint. Some offered tools. Others brought casseroles. One neighbor even donated new tack for Midnight. Reverend Cole offered a blessing as Wes fired up the grill. Grace patched a fence rail. Zeke hung a new porch swing with Savannah helping him tighten the bolts. Dr. Holloway placed a hand on Savannah's shoulder. You gave him a second chance, and now you both have one. In the glow of the barn lights, Savannah stood with Midnight, their shadows long in the grass. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to run. She was home. Spring arrived like a soft apology. Snow melted from the ridge and trickled through the pasture, turning brown fields to green. Wild mustard bloomed along the fence line, and the creek that had once frozen solid now danced freely around smooth stones. The Lane Ranch, once quiet, broken, almost forgotten, was alive again. Savannah Lane stood in the center of it all, her hair brushing her shoulders, her boots muddy from morning chores. Beside her, Midnight grazed calmly, his black coat shimmering beneath the soft Montana sun. It had been 3 months since the trial. 3 months since Redfern Hollow stopped calling him the Devil Horse and started calling him something else entirely. A hero. But Savannah didn't think of him as that. To her, he was family. The ranch had changed, not just in appearance, but in spirit. The barn roof was new, the stalls were clean. The porch swing creaked again when the wind caught it just right. Neighbors who once looked away now dropped by with feed, tools, or simply coffee and conversation. What had started as whispers of scandal had transformed into something rare in a small town. Pride. Inside the main house, Zeke moved with a quiet purpose. He wasn't the same man who had buried himself in mine shafts and left his daughter to shadows. He was present now, in the kitchen, in the fields, in the space between silence and apology. Every morning, he made Savannah pancakes. Every evening, they sat side by side and repaired what years had unraveled. They didn't talk about Lorraine anymore. Not because they forgot, but because they didn't need to. One afternoon, Savannah wandered into the loft above the barn and found an old dust-covered box labeled Emma, her mother's name. Inside were photos, pressed flowers, and a faded leather journal. She opened it slowly, fingers trembling as she turned the fragile pages. Most were filled with notes about horses, training methods, calming techniques, sketches of hooves and bridles. But near the back was a single page written in her mother's gentle script. Midnight is different. He listens, even when no one is speaking. I think he understands more than we do. If something ever happens to me, I pray he finds Savannah. And stays. Savannah pressed the page to her chest, eyes brimming. "You did, Mama," she whispered. "He found me." Outside, a small crowd gathered near the fence. Word had spread that Savannah and Midnight were starting something new, a sanctuary. Not just for abused horses, but for kids like her. Ones who didn't have the words yet, or the strength. Ones who needed stillness, and something steady to hold on to. They called it the Midnight Sanctuary. It started with 2 rescues. A skittish palomino from a hoarding case, and a blind pony surrendered by a traveling circus. Then came 3 more, then a dog with half a tail. By summer, they had a full barn and a waiting list. Dr. Marin Holloway helped design the therapy sessions. Reverend Cole hosted weekend story circles under the old elm tree. Sheriff Wes donated security cameras, just in case. And Grace? Grace built a new sign for the front gate, carved by hand. The Midnight Sanctuary, a place for the ones who stayed. Every Sunday, Savannah led group rides through the valley trails. Midnight always took the lead, his pace slow, patient. Some of the kids barely spoke. Others had stories stitched into their skin, scars that didn't always show. But when they rode, they smiled. And that was enough. Spring arrived like a soft apology. Snow melted from the ridge and trickled through the pasture, turning brown fields to green. Wild mustard bloomed along the fence line, and the creek that had once frozen solid now danced freely around smooth stones. The Lane Ranch, once quiet, broken, almost forgotten, was alive again. Savannah Lane stood in the center of it all, her hair brushing her shoulders, her boots muddy from morning chores. Beside her, Midnight grazed calmly, his black coat shimmering beneath the soft Montana sun. It had been 3 months since the trial. 3 months since Redfern Hollow stopped calling him the Devil Horse and started calling him something else entirely. A hero. But Savannah didn't think of him as that. To her, he was family. The ranch had changed, not just in appearance, but in spirit. The barn roof was new, the stalls were clean. The porch swing creaked again when the wind caught it just right. Neighbors who once looked away now dropped by with feed, tools, or simply coffee and conversation. What had started as whispers of scandal had transformed into something rare in a small town. Pride. Inside the main house, Zeke moved with a quiet purpose. He wasn't the same man who had buried himself in mine shafts and left his daughter to shadows. He was present now, in the kitchen, in the fields, in the space between silence and apology. Every morning, he made Savannah pancakes. Every evening, they sat side by side and repaired what years had unraveled. They didn't talk about Lorraine anymore. Not because they forgot, but because they didn't need to. One afternoon, Savannah wandered into the loft above the barn and found an old, dust-covered box labeled Emma, her mother's name. Inside were photos, pressed flowers, and a faded leather journal. She opened it slowly, fingers trembling as she turned the fragile pages. Most were filled with notes about horses, training methods, calming techniques, sketches of hooves and bridles. But near the back was a single page written in her mother's gentle script. Midnight is different. He listens, even when no one is speaking. I think he understands more than we do. If something ever happens to me, I pray he finds Savannah. And stays. Savannah pressed the page to her chest, eyes brimming. "You did, Mama," she whispered. "He found me." Outside, a small crowd gathered near the fence. Word had spread that Savannah and Midnight were starting something new, a sanctuary. Not just for abused horses, but for kids like her. Ones who didn't have the words yet, or the strength. Ones who needed stillness, and something steady to hold on to. They called it the Midnight Sanctuary. It started with 2 rescues, a skittish palomino from a hoarding case, and a blind pony surrendered by a traveling circus. Then came 3 more, then a dog with half a tail. By summer, they had a full barn and a waiting list. Dr. Marin Holloway helped design the therapy sessions. Reverend Cole hosted weekend story circles under the old elm tree. Sheriff Wes donated security cameras, just in case. And Grace? Grace built a new sign for the front gate, carved by hand. The Midnight Sanctuary, a place for the ones who stayed. Every Sunday, Savannah led group rides through the valley trails. Midnight always took the lead, his pace slow, patient. Some of the kids barely spoke. Others had stories stitched into their skin, scars that didn't always show. But when they rode, they smiled. And that was enough.